Hello, everyone. This is our Spiritist Psychology Study Group. Tonight is our last day of the year. We are working on the modules for 2026, and I will be sharing the contents of the study group for 2025 and its calendar very shortly. And tonight we are having our last one, which is the Therapeutics of Love. Over to you, Anahy.
Thank you, Fabrizio. Hello, everyone. So we are starting with the book Psychology of Gratitude by Joana de Angelis and Divaldo Pereira Franco. And we are going to be, it's chapter 4, we are focusing in, that it's called The Conquest of Fulfillment Through Gratitude. Okay, and the dynamics today is different. We are not going to have a PowerPoint presentation because we are going to be discussing this topic and everybody can just, raise the hand and we are going to be talking together. So I would like to start with one of Joanna's sentence for us to reflect upon. She says, each human being is a specific cosmos whose origin is lost in the depths of infinity. Wow. So each one of us is a specific cosmos whose origin is lost in the depths of infinity. So we don't know when we were born as spirits, right? It's only the source can know, right? That we can call God or whoever people want to call it. And the origin is lost in the depths of infinity. So I think it makes us kind of humble, right? To look at ourselves and think that we are a specific cosmos. And then Joanna says transcendent, so we are all transcendent beings, right? And we reflect the experiences lived and accumulated in the deep personal unconscious, as well as those recorded in the collective unconscious, producing the lamentable process of alienation. And I would like to start asking you guys to reflect upon that. Why is in this sentence Joanna saying that our experiences, okay, when we are evolving, they accumulate in the deep personal unconscious as well as in the collective unconscious, producing the lamentable process of alienation. Because I want to remind you all that Joanna talks a lot, and actually the purpose of our meetings and our studies on Joanna is to understand ourselves so that we can evolve, expand our consciousness as individuals, but also as a collective, as a family of beings, spiritual beings that are having this experience here on earth and evolving. So Joanna says that it's like everything is recorded inside of us, in the depths of our unconscious individually and also collectively. But this process, let's say, produced a lamentable alienation. Does anyone care to comment or ask any questions? If you do, I will go slowly, okay? If you do, just raise your hand and then we can exchange ideas. Go ahead, Anne, please.
Okay, so I just put my head on the board and just I please apologize for my ignorance. But I don't understand why she says, what is this lamentable process of alienation? Is it that we are becoming alienated from our cosmic being, that we are becoming disconnected from that wider cosmic being that we are, because we are connected to our history, if you like? I don't know if that's what she's saying. It is a concept that's a little bit difficult for me, because it says if we're transcendent, cosmic, and we are like everywhere and everything, but our history, our past, our experiences individually and collectively, it's almost like they weigh us down in a way, so they disconnect us from that transcendence. I don't know if that's what she's trying to say. My question is that what she's trying to say? Or if not, please somebody help me, because I find it quite tricky, because sometimes she doesn't use many words. She doesn't elaborate very much, which I find like, okay, what exactly,
You and everybody else and myself also. And so that's the fun of it, that we can reflect together. I understood, and here there's something really important, because remember, with Professor Lionel Corbett and in other meetings, we talked about the non-dual reality and aspects, because here we live in a very we are in a very dual experience, me and the other, the spirit and matter, right? Good and evil. But at this, it's a paradox, because you see, I think that your comment is great, and because she starts talking about that we are all a specific cosmos. So if we are a cosmos, each one of us, a specific cosmos, and of course the cosmos by definition encompasses everything, right? So at the same time, remember that drawing when Lionel Corbett was with us, that we saw, like we are fishes in an ocean or waves in the ocean, right? So the ocean would be everything, the cosmos, as we are allowed to perceive it at this point of our spiritual evolution. But at the same time, we are individuals. We are fishes or waves. Doesn't matter the metaphor, but it's a paradox, because we are in the ocean. The ocean is within us, if we call the cosmos, right? But at the same time, we have everything inside of us, right? And we are in everything. It's that holographic paradigm, right? But at the same time, we are individuals. So I think, and everybody, let's think together. That's the purpose of this dynamic that we are doing today. That she starts talking about that cosmos, that we are cosmic beings, and a specific cosmos, each one of us, whose origin is lost in the depths of infinity. So, and I always think, and Lionel Corbett talks a lot about that, we see each other as separate beings, right? Because we have a body, and even when we talk about the psyche, we say, so my psyche, my soul, right? And myself, the higher self, self capital S, right? But at the same time, if you remember when we were talking in previous meetings about consciousness and the collective unconscious, so all of us, I think it was the Edinger, the diagram that I showed you guys. So all of us, all ourselves are connected, interconnected. So, okay, some of you guys are in the United States, some are in Tunisia, then some are in the UK, in Brazil, or, whichever part of the world. But at the same time, it's not only because we are here meeting virtually and we can see each other if we want, that we are connected. we are connected, always actually, but our egos are paying attention at this moment. So ourselves are in this non-dual approach, all interconnected. That's the basic stuff of all religions when they talk about the divine. And a lot of people nowadays, and scientists and thinkers are, maybe you have already heard this term, they are talking about a divine matrix. Have you heard this? A divine matrix, that we would be immersed on it, on this divine matrix, and we are part of it. It could be the breath of God, let's say this, the spirit of the source, the loving energy. Joanna gives a lot of different names for the source, right? So I think as Anne, and maybe some of you want to share your thoughts about that, that Joanna is all the time, that's why it's so difficult. Sometimes she's talking about the ego, about our consciousness, about us as individual in this experience, right? Other times she's asking us to think of ourselves as immortal spirits in evolving together. So when evolving towards this light, let's say, that is God, or this, all this energy, creative and source of love that creates everything. So when we are in this aspect, I think, and everybody else, then she is calling us to think in a non-dual way. Then she is the light teacher that is telling us, oh, but remember, you are immortal spirits evolving together. So all our selves, capital S, are interconnected. And the difference that we feel from each other is just an illusion of the ego, right? It would be an illusion of the ego. It's a reality for us now, but in a deeper sense, or in a non-dual approach, this division and this separatedness doesn't exist actually. So I think that's why it's so difficult. And I think that when she says that we are transcendent, right? But here in this experience, so we have an ego consciousness, right? And so she's saying that experience lived as transcendent beings and accumulated in the deep personal unconscious, okay, in this experience, as well as those recorded. But when she says deep personal unconscious, remember the iceberg. It's not only the personal unconscious as Freudian personal unconscious, the deep personal unconscious. So let's go dive, in this ocean and understand that she says deep personal unconscious. So we are going, it's not actually down, but it's just to make a point here, because it could be here. It doesn't have to be, up and down. It's just a metaphor. As well as those recorded in the collective unconscious. So if everything it's not available to the ego, and I think in this sentence she's saying, then we develop this lamentable process of alienation, because then consciousness think that it's, the stuff is not available to us, the experiences. So we make mistakes, we do everything that the ego says that it's okay, but not listening to this depths, to this wisdom that it's in the depths of our psyche. Is that okay? I just think that it's, I think you're right. Sometimes she wants us to think really hard, because it's not easy. because, well, that's why I read and read again and try to, to follow her reasoning. Also, not only with the mind, but with the heart, because sometimes she asks us to pay attention to the ego and our psyche here in this experience. And others, she's saying, wow, this is a non-dual approach, and you are cosmic beings. Is that too difficult? What do you think, Anne?
Yeah, so I I think that it's like one of those things where I almost think I get it. I get a glimpse of that I might be able to get it, and then I kind of lose it again. You know what I mean? So it's a construction, I think. I need to exercise myself in thinking in this different way. I think that it's a little bit like that. So, but I think that your explanation was really helpful in this way. So because I'm thinking, because I was thinking, why does she say lamentable alienation? Why, why is it a lament? But it's that we are like focusing on let's say on our life here and now, and we're becoming alienated or detached from our cosmic reality and all that we carry, all the experiences that we carry from the past. But now I'll just throw a little spanner in the works and say, I thought that all the experiences that we have from the past and even the collective unconscious, that they in somehow color and motivate and affect us, whether we like it or not, whether we notice it or not, that they're invariably affecting us from the background, if you something like that's how I understood it. So we're not really disconnected from them, but we're disconnecting them from like an observational point of view, but they're still acting on us. I don't know. That was my impression of how these things work.
Yeah, I think you're right, because in the next sentence, she talks about, the collective shadow. And if we think in the way that people all around the globe still this day, 21st century, make wars, and are aggressive and feel separate. This is my land, my people, you are not welcome. And I can't understand what you are saying, for instance, because you are from another part of the world. And so it's, as you said, I think, and everything it's inside of us. We share, it's a collective unconscious. We share the experience not only in this lifetime, but from all our past lifetimes, together as the collective that is evolving this planet. And I don't know, maybe some of us are from, have been in other planets or in other dimensions, right? But we share everything. So you see, in this sense, there is no point in doing wars or competing for anything, because everything, as Anne said, is available to all. And it's not outside of us, it's inside of us. But the problem is that the ego lives an illusion here. And, in the illusion, the next sentence, she talks about the collective shadow. And she talks about academic prejudice that dominates society. And I can tell you about that because it's really hard to talk with colleagues, in the psychiatry field, for instance, about spirituality, about immortality, because, oh no, this is, it's wishful thinking, or it's an immature way of thinking, and this and that. But we know through near-death experiences, deathbed visions, and a lot of research in mediumship, that really the psyche doesn't need, and it's out of space and time, as Jung said, and doesn't need the body, and even the brain is using it, and it's also not produced by the brain. our mind, but that's, I think it's why Joanna talks about academic prejudice that still dominates society and produce, she says, because then we are stuck in the duality, right? And produces resentful feelings of guilt and animosity, violence and frustration, fear and loneliness, making the citizens ungrateful, right? And they should become, and we should become like a torch, she says, of dazzling light, altering the social and moral landscape of humanity. That's our spiritual mission, let's say. And what are we still doing? Not thanks, thanks the Almighty, not all of us, but a lot of people are already or still trying to make wars and and fight and all of this. So she goes on saying the perspective of transcendence offers the human being a meaning. Remember, spirituality is all about purpose and meaning. So a meaning that is equally grand, as it does not end its evolutionary cycle when death occurs. So we are still, to this day, pretty much controlled by the fear of death, aren't we? If I feel that I'm sick or for instance, and I can tell you, my ego, as everybody else, I have been coughing like crazy for the past 2 or 3 weeks, right? And I said, oh, do I have a pneumonia? Do I have this and that? So my ego and maybe my childish fears or whatever complex, of course, will feel threatened by a symptom that it's upsetting, and I don't know from, if there's something bad happening in my body or this and that. The ego, people, and some of our complexes. But if I do, as Joanna is trying to say to us, the self-analysis, self-encounter, meditate, of course, go to the doctor, see this and that, but many times these days, I can tell you, the medical personnel, the doctors doesn't know, they don't know what's going on with people. I can tell you that. It's because we are still lacking the holistic view, in the medicine. So what happens is that, okay, but then I can realize which part of me, from where the fear is coming, right? And of course, for instance, when we were children, the child is always afraid of something because the ego is still very frail, right? So the child needs father and mother and whoever is taking care of he or she to explain things, to bring comfort, to say that everything is going to be all right. But if we do as Joanna, we are not children anymore. Of course, we have the child complex within us and many others, right? And this fear, for instance, can be coming from these complexes. But if we do, as Joanna says, the perspective of transcendence, okay, so let's talk with my higher self, with my self, capital S. Let me meditate, let me calm down, in a sense, reduce my ego, right? And try to talk with the wisdom that I have within, with my inner cosmos, let's say, right? And oops, then the conversation changes totally because, okay, I'm here talking with you guys. Maybe tomorrow, we don't know, right, Fabrizio? We are planning next year, but who knows? Maybe Anne or Fabrizio or anybody else will be leading because Anahy is not going to be available anymore. Then you can talk to me through mediumship or whatever, right? But it doesn't matter because we have shared these moments together. So everything that we have shared is within all of us, right? And then we know deep inside that we are transcendent beings. And this gives much more purpose, for instance, to our meeting here and to people that are going to be listening, right, afterwards. And also this gives purpose and gives meaning because it's precious. This moment here is precious and it's going to be with us for forever. It's an experience of our spirit. So it doesn't matter if next year, sorry, Fabrizio, it's just an example. We do hope we are going to all be together next year. But actually, for our spirits, doesn't our self, capital S, doesn't matter if we are not going to be, if we are going to be present or not. Maybe next year is going to be Anne and Fabrizio and somebody else in the meetings. But I said, whatever dimension I will be, I said, wow, I want to go there and see what the guys are talking, and then I will be with you, for instance, right? All this reasoning comes to us when we connect to our inner cosmos, as Joanna is asking us to do. So it's not wishful thinking, it's not some kind of fantasy, it's reality. And how do we connect to this reality? Because we know it's within each one of us, this wisdom. So Joanna says that the goal, the perspective, or this perspective, right, has its goals. In this moment, these goals are transferred from the narrow circle of bodily constraints to the cosmic expanse, extending indefinitely. Wow. So I know that you guys probably have been listening to a lot of podcasts and things like that. And Mark wants to say something. I just finished this idea, this insight that came. And a lot of people are talking about a spiritual awakening that is happening all around the globe collectively. And I think that's what Joanna is saying here. Go ahead, Mark, please.
Thanks, Anahy. I just noticed to put up a hand, so this may flow on from 10, 20 minutes ago, but I guess just on that last point that you made, the spiritual awakening, I guess for myself, what ideally removes some of the lamentable alienation is the recognition that this is probably going to unfold over hundreds of years. I mean, the alienation, as far as I'm, concerned during this incarnation, has been going on, for several hundred years. I mean, the dominant view is, a materialist view. We've gone through industrialization. We're replacing ourselves with technology, on and on and on. So to come back into like a conscious unity in duality, I think it's going to unfold for quite some time. And I guess just in our community, in our space here, I want to put some additional, maybe horizontal alongside, but a recognition that perhaps this inner cosmos is certainly accessible through proper silent or inner contemplation. But the alienation of the journey that I'm trying to go on is that I am a soul. I am so to speak, which has a lot of shade and shadow with it, but a lower self, currently incarnated as a soul. Then my lower self goes back to my higher self. So there is always a connection because I'm spirit, but I'm not aware of everything. I'm aware of what I need for this particular incarnation. I'm still connected to my fellow humans and challenged with all of the parts of going through waves of ego or waves of free will and a conversation between who I am, a soul, with my parts of personality, my wounding. But it's a more discrete, focused, finite unfolding, which I think is sometimes that's how I create a non-alienation, how I reconcile. What does it mean, inner cosmos? I'm a soul. I'm enough that I incarnated, and I do and I go about these learnings and growth forward. But yeah, and I contribute to my higher self and spirit. Um, so there's other things, but that's just my contribution right now over the last 20 minutes or so.
And I think it's a great contribution, Mark, because I was listening to you and think, yeah, because you talked about centuries and industrial revolution and now technology. And I think as light teachers, as Joanna, I think they're trying to speed up the process. It came to my mind when you were talking about do we need, more hundreds of years more? If we are just here, guys, talking about that, don't we have, and I know that different groups all around the globe in different ways are talking about this kind of stuff, are paying attention about, and are saying, no, this is so silly. I'm not going to fight my brother or sister. And I recognize each person as, the right to be, and I recognize that we are in the same ocean, even if in different parts of this huge ocean, like the divine matrix, as a lot of people is calling it. So I think, I don't know, when I was listening to you, Mark, it came to my mind. They are trying to speed up the process, I think, because we have to pay attention also to our young people, They're such great youngsters. Okay, there are some that are kind of lost in technology, right? In video games and stuff like that. But there are many, many others that, I will give you an example. I don't know if I gave you I don't think so before, but I have a grandnephew, I think. It's a year and a half, and the father and mother, of course, the baby is very, very smart and talks a lot and all this stuff. But they are with the mobile recording the baby all the time. And the baby was having some food, right? And they, of course, they were recording, and the father said, I was saying, and the baby said, just keep it away, or something like that. And he said, oh, you want your dish away? You don't want any more food? No. And he pointed to the mobile. And he said, wow, I have just been censored by a year and a half little boy. Of course, it's a year and a half in the ego, but in the self is there, said, this is silly. Stop recording me and look at me, right? So I do have faith, in these beautiful souls that are coming to help us. And I think this is a way of speeding up the process, but we have to do the best we can, the so-called adults, right? And to help in this awakening, in this process.
Just very brief, follow-up on that, if I may, only because you literally right at the beginning of your comments, and I mentioned something that was also occurring to me. And again, it's just a contribution to our space. But this point about light, and even light and love, which set that aside, but light, since that's written by Joanna and then it's talked about here, and then this contribution to speeding up the process, I think there's a significant distinction between a focus on light as potentially its own extreme, in contrast to harmonizing light and dark and harmonizing sun and shadow, which then brings in personal responsibility to the individual. Because at least in my studies and my understanding and exploration is that any one thing has an equal and opposite other. So a very major focus and emphasis, fixation, fetish, whatever, on light is going to create an equal and opposite dark, shade, and shadow, as opposed to the recognition that each individual has to harmonize within oneself, and then as an example of both shade, shadow, and dark, and light, sun, and so forth. So I think that is also something that's not looked at in our, whether it's Joanna writing the word collective shadow or our reflections upon what do we mean by shadow, particularly when we want to be putting out light, praying about light, saying the world needs to come into more light, as opposed to harmonizing that within myself.
It's a great comment. Let's think together. I was also when you talked about light and the shadow. I remember, Mark and everybody, that a lot of people are saying, and we could connect with these light teachers, right? Light teachers, because they are bringing all this wisdom back to us, in a sense, back to our small consciousness, the small personality, as Jung said, trying to remember or make us remember, let's say. But a lot of people are saying that the collective shadow is showing now in our days. And because we are evolving in consciousness. So when we talk about the individuation process, it's all about, as you say, Mark, to balance this light and dark because of this dimension, because it's a material dimension, and because here we have an ego, a personality that's doing the job of living this experience. But we have to remember, as Anne's comments made me think about, that we are talking about this dimension. But if we go to higher dimensions, probably we can think. And we have some mediums here in Brazil, as you said, Divaldo and Chico and everybody else. And even in mediums all around the globe, because I have read some beautiful books like Testimony of Light that I told you by Ellen Graves in England, for instance, and it's she psychographed her friend Francis Banks. I bought this book in England when I was there at some point. And she talks about, and a lot of also esoteric knowledge talks about different dimensions and levels of consciousness. So I think we could understand this light and darkness here in our dimension. But of course, at some point, we are going to get together in another dimension and say, oh, okay, how much light or how much shadow are we experiencing here? But for instance, in the Testimony of Light by Ellen Graves, Frances Banks is talking about her experience when she died, right, in South Africa, as I recall. And she said, and it was a dimension like Chico Xavier wrote Our Home, Nosso Lar, the beautiful first book of a series by the spirit André Luiz, where he talks about spiritual, and he describes André Luiz a spiritual city that they call colony, let's say, but it was a dimension pretty near to ours, right? So of course there you can see when he describes the people, the way that they act, it's pretty close to what we experience here. People still think of each other as the other, as if when I think it's in Testimony of Light, when she describes also, it's kind of the same thing when she is in a dimension pretty close to the one that we are in the material experience. But then there is I don't know if I told I don't want to give spoilers to someone that wants to read the book, or if I have already told you about that. But she was a very intellectual person. She was a professor, of course, in South Africa of psychology and stuff like that. And she was also a nun. It was a mission. I can't remember the religion. But then they had this monastery or whatever in South Africa. And I think this was the early 70s, when there was some kind of attack in the monastery and they died or something like that. I don't know if I'm mixing the stories, okay? But the important thing is that she was very intellectual. And when she was there was a nun in the spiritual realms, but very close. There was a nun that was, she used to think of this nun as, kind of, I don't know if silly, but not very smart, very intelligent. And then they brought, the spiritual friends brought this nun for her to talk to. And she was very pleased because they were friends when they were here. But at some point she said, "Oh, okay, so you are going to be here with us." And the very humble nun said, "No, they told me I'm going somewhere else. I cannot stay. I just came here to say hello to you and, and talk to you." And she left. And then the guide, spiritual guide, told her that this nun that she thought was kind of silly or not so smart was going to higher dimensions. So, and we have the description of different dimensions, not only through spiritist knowledge, but also lots of esoteric or spiritualist knowledge or religions. So what I'm thinking, Mark, is that we experience this duality in different dimensions, even spiritual dimensions, but related to our spiritual evolution. And not, who's the author, Testimony of Light? Helen Graves. If someone can have a quick look, put in the chat, Testimony of Light by Helen Graves. So I'm thinking that as we evolve spiritually, so that we don't need, for instance, an ego, I'm not quite sure if we experience, yes, I know that. Just trying to think a non-dual approach. Then we don't need, it's not that we need, but we are not going to experience all this difference between all this duality of light and darkness. I think it makes sense from all
It makes sense, but the only thing I'll add as a final point is that the possibility that perhaps part of this exercise of incarnation is about the conversation between waves of ego, free will, parts of self, etc., wounds, and me as a soul that does not judge the incarnation, but works with the components and the architecture that is incarnating, and that it's a conversation in contrast to the removal of parts of self, but actually the reorganization of parts of self where soul is not judging. I'm not judging the experience. I'm not trying to transcend the experience. And that actually maybe there's plenty to learn from just the three dimensions, since there's 8 billion souls on this planet. Seems like there's still a lot of lessons just to learn from these three dimensions before either
Yes.
to go only towards the light or only go towards the another dimension. Seems to be plenty of things to try to ground and accept and heal
No,
right here.
I totally agree with you, but remember at some point I told you that I will cite the Dalai Lama that said that we have to be we should be like if we were riding a bicycle and with the two hands holding it and one hand in the duality and the other in the non-duality, because we usually we think in terms of or either this or that. And I think everybody that it's trying to help us evolve in consciousness, they keep telling us it's not or, it's and. It's both things. Yes, we are 8 billion people, and we have this information. There are many more in the spiritual realm very close to us. So we are, all these souls evolving together. But at the same time, okay, and when we are here, we are doing the hard work with the ego, with our egos. But I think it helps a lot, Mark and everybody else, to think that at the same time, our higher self, that is a spark from the source, right, has, even if in a tiny, it's a tiny, small, very small part, but has this part of this, the source, let's say the source, capital S. So even if it's like a seed, but everything is in the seed. This is the non-dual approach. And it's not some fantasy, because we know that it's real through all the communication, different approaches and religions and knowledges. And I think the spiritual teachers are trying to help us to understand that, keeping in mind, not that avoiding or denying the work of the ego in the dual reality, material reality. Of course not. But I think they want us to keep in mind that we are both when we are here. And because Joanna says in the next sentence, the transient ego, in this new perception, if we broaden our perception, alters its behavior in the face of the fascinating understanding of immortality, freeing the self, capital S now, our imago Dei, from its painful constriction. I feel the constriction. I don't know if you guys feel it, but because when we meditate, for instance, and we are in a spiritual work, as we are going to do pretty soon, right? In a sense, we are going to play a little bit with our selves, capital S. So we are less constricted by our complexes, our traumas, right? The stuff in our personal unconscious. And I think they want us to understand that the time is now, is the archetype of the apocalypse. We have talked about that it's the revelation of everything. We know already, we have a lot of psychology these days, like not so much 200 years, more or less, years of psychology, but we can understand pretty well, I would say, our ego, our defense mechanism, and this and that. What it seems to this day, we can't understand. It's our immortal souls, our psyche, in a sense, our psyche, because our psyche, right, has the self, capital S, that is our higher self, that it's not only in this dimension. The self, as we were talking in the beginning, is in the ocean. We are interconnected through ourselves, not through our egos exactly. Our egos are connecting to each other because of the virtual stuff right here in technology, but ourselves. And for instance, I can go to sleep and I can have a dream with Mark saying, Anahy, I don't agree with what you said about that and that. Let's talk a little bit more. And I can understand this dream through the lenses of a complex, for instance. Oh, my animals was projected onto Mark or this and that. Or depending on the stuff, right, Mark? Let's see tonight if we're going to meet. But for instance, depending on the perspective, I can say, I just had a spiritual meeting with Mark because we wanted to talk a little bit more. And many people have that. They don't connect, or they always think in terms of, only the personal unconscious complexes and things like that. So I'll just go a little bit further because we want to have this time to our playing with the self. She says also, ignorance of the integral being accounts for many conflicts, such as fear, anxiety, uncertainty, and lack of existential purpose. Since from one moment to another, death, cutting short life, would reduce everything to nothing. That's the materialistic view, right? Transcendence, in turn, provides the sense of gratitude in all circumstances, fostering healthy behavior, uplifting relationships, and ineffable joy of living with eyes set on a promising future. I'll just finish this part because I think it summarizes everything, and everybody has the rest of the summary to read at home, and and we will be talking later more of that next year, hopefully, with myself or whoever, all right? And so Joanna goes on saying, a man and a woman who identified as immortal have prospects of achieving fulfillment due to the inevitable possibility of rectifying errors, rehabilitating themselves from past wrongs, starting over, and succeeding in endeavors that were marked by failure. This is, of course, she's talking about reincarnation and the continuous evolving nature of our spirits. Giving thanks for being transcendent is a self-psychotherapy of optimism, which frees the internal Narcissus from its unreal image. Of course, talking about when the ego is closing itself, dissolving the deceptive Peter Pan syndrome. And I would say not only egoic syndrome of Peter Pan, but also if we are stuck in immaturity, even spiritual immaturity. And then she says, this will lead us to the achievement of individuation, following the psychological maturation that will result in the numinous state. So the connecting state, that experience that connects us to the transcendent, to the divine. No more diseases or sick states in the individuals who have found themselves, who have discovered their immortality, and who advance towards their fulfillment. I think we could stop here. I don't know about you guys, Mark, and anybody else have comments? What do you think? Fabricio? I just want to tell you guys that in this chapter, and I just put here in the summary, but we have already talked about the previous meetings. when Jonah talks about development of consciousness, remember I showed, I think it was Edinger, a drawing about the ego splitting in a sense in the psyche, and the ego self. I don't want to give them spoilers, Fabrizio, but we are going to be talking more next year about the ego self axis. But it's it's a great topic because it's the evolution of consciousness in this dimension, but also as spirit, because of course the self, as we know, the ego actually is a complex of the self in the depth psychology approach, Jungian's psychology, and putting together, because just for people to remember, Freud said that our consciousness is the ego, right? And we have the superego, our impulses, also the id, and everything else. But it's the consciousness is the ego point for Freud. And for Jung, we have many consciousness, let's say. We have the ego, but we have the main conscious, the higher conscious, that is the self, capital S. And we have a lot of complexes that are subpersonalities also. In a sense, they have their own consciousness, the way to perceive things. So, but the main conversation for our individuation process, for our growth and balance, as Mark was saying, in this world, in this experience, would be the conversation between the ego and the self, our higher self. Okay, but more about this next year. To hope all of you will be with us. Fabrizio, back to you. And I think we could stop recording and say bye to everybody that is listening. We'll be listening later. And just invite everyone to be with us next year. And if possible, sometimes present here. Let's not be always in, as Mark said, in the non-dual approach, right? Talking only through ourselves, but also be together so that people that are together can make also some experiences, and we are going to be doing more of that next year. So I'll say bye-bye to everybody that is just listening to us. We will stop recording to make the experiential part of this meeting.
Thank you, Anahy. So yeah, so 2025 look very promising. We will have a new module, and also we have the Congress. So the Congress is a place where we will be able to discuss this in more depth, and we are working on it, and a lot of surprises coming up, and hopefully I will be sharing the details of the Congress very soon. Okay, so goodbye, and I see you all next year in the next module. Bye for now.